The world called her the most beautiful woman alive, and then spent a lifetime watching her pay for it. 8 marriages, twice to the same man, a back broken at 12 that never stopped hurting, a husband killed in a crash she escaped only because she was too ill to board the plane, and beneath every diamond, a hunger for love that none of it could ever answer. There is a photograph of Elizabeth Taylor in her grand years, jewels at her throat, dark hair arranged like a coronation, eyes made famous before she was old enough to understand fame. Look at it for a moment, and the contradiction begins to show itself. She appeared to have everything a woman could be given: beauty, money, men, applause, and the sort of crown the world places on a head only so it may later watch it tremble. And yet, beneath the splendor, there was a child who had never quite been allowed to be a child, a woman whose body carried old injuries, whose love life was treated as public property, and whose private griefs were often dressed up for the cameras. Everyone remembers the diamonds, the marriages, Cleopatra, Richard Burton, the violet eyes. But beneath all that gilded shadow was a more difficult story. A girl trained to be looked at, a woman punished for being visible, and a survivor who turned late in life toward the suffering of others. This is the story of Elizabeth Taylor, not as a legend, not as a scandal, but as a human being who lived inside a myth until the myth began to consume her. If these are the names you grew up with, the studios, the diamonds, the loves the whole world once argued over, then you're among friends here. Subscribe, and a story like hers will find you every few days. Before the jewels, there was a small girl in London. February 27th, 1932, Hampstead Gardens suburb, London. A quiet, ordered sort of place with English gardens and respectable houses where the weather often seemed to arrive in greys and silvers. There, Elizabeth Rosamond Taylor was born to American parents who had brought with them refinement, ambition, and the uneasy confidence of people who knew how society worked. Her father, Francis Len Taylor, dealt in art. He understood objects, value, provenance, the difference between beauty and price. Her mother, Sarah Southern Taylor, had once been an actress. She had left the stage after marriage, but the stage had not entirely left her. Some people retire from performance. Some merely pass the unfinished part of themselves to a child. Elizabeth was not born into poverty, nor into obscurity. She was born into taste, expectation, and watchfulness. She had a face people noticed early. She had eyes people described as extraordinary. In families like that, beauty was not only admired, it was managed. Then the world darkened. By 1939, Europe had begun to tilt toward war, and the Taylor family left England for the United States. Elizabeth was 7 years old when Los Angeles became her new landscape. Warmer light, broader streets, palm trees, studios, and people who knew how to turn a child's face into a contract. Within months, her mother had begun arranging opportunities. Universal Pictures gave the girl a small contract. It did not last. Another child might have been allowed to return to lessons and games. Elizabeth was moved onward. MGM came next, and MGM was not a school so much as a kingdom with cameras. There, childhood acquired a schedule. There were lines to learn, photographs to sit for, clothes to wear properly, lessons to take in between work. The studio taught children how to move, how to speak, how to be charming on command. It did not teach them how to be alone, how to be ordinary, or how to belong to themselves. By the time Elizabeth was working in National Velvet, she was still only a girl. She rode, rehearsed, waited, obeyed. During the making of that film, she was thrown from a horse and hurt her back. The machinery around her moved on. The pain was treated as something to be managed. not as something that should stop the picture. That injury would follow her, quietly at first, then loudly for the rest of her life. National Velvet made her famous. It also confirmed a lesson that would be written into her bones. If the performance was beautiful enough, the suffering behind it could be ignored. The child became valuable. MGM watched her weight, her clothes, her image, her behavior. Approval came when she was lovely, obedient, and useful. She learned early that the room softened when she pleased people. She learned that affection and assessment could sound very much alike. She had not inherited a throne in the usual way. It was built around her while she was still too young to understand its height. By 18, she had appeared in film after film. She had been educated in studios, guarded by adults, admired by strangers, and shaped by a system that praised her for growing up in public. She had never truly lived outside supervision. She had never been left to become plain, foolish, awkward, or free. And then the world decided the girl was ready to become a woman. The late 1940s carried Elizabeth Taylor forward with the strange brightness of studio-made youth. She had come through National Velvet not merely as a promising child, but as a young star with a face the camera loved. There had been Lassie Come Home before it, and other pictures after it. But the horse, the girl, and the dream of victory fixed her in the public imagination. Hollywood knew what it had found. The studio presented her as wholesome, beautiful, and almost unreal. Magazine covers followed. Columnists praised her. Her body matured early, and the machinery that had once sold her as a charming child began to prepare her for adult roles. It was all done with the smoothness of a well-rehearsed dance. One step, then another. A girl on a pony became a young woman opposite grown men. At 18, she starred in Father of the Bride, a film that played neatly with the idea of a daughter stepping into marriage. The same year, life imitated publicity. On May 6, 1950, Elizabeth married Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr., heir to the Hilton Hotel fortune. The wedding was treated as a grand romantic event, the union of beauty and money, youth and promise. Cameras approved, the studio approved. The newspapers had their picture. She was 18, she was famous. She had no idea how little protection fame could offer. For a little while from the outside, everything appeared arranged. The young star had entered adulthood with a husband from a great hotel family, a career still rising, and a public that wanted to see her as proof that beauty was rewarded. She had taken up the scepter of celebrity before she had learned the cost of carrying it. The work deepened after that. A Place in the Sun helped show that she was not merely a child star grown taller. She could be still, luminous, and dangerous on screen. The camera did not simply record her, it surrendered to her. Then came other major films, and later Giant, where she appeared beside Rock Hudson and James Dean, standing inside the wide American myth of land, oil, pride, and loneliness. Her personal life, however, did not obey the studio's preferred story. The marriage to Hilton ended quickly. It had frightened her. The public had seen a beautiful wedding. Inside it, there had been drinking, cruelty, and a young woman discovering that a rich husband could be another kind of locked room. She divorced him in 1951, still hardly more than a girl. Then Michael Wilding entered her life. He was British, older, quieter, and gentle in ways that must have felt like shelter after Hilton. They married in 1952. Their sons, Michael Jr. and Christopher, were born during that marriage, and for a time Elizabeth seemed to have found something almost domestic: husband, children, work, and a calmer household. And yet Hollywood did not release her. The films kept coming. The public appetite grew. Servants and assistants helped hold the domestic life together, but the center of the house was never truly still. Elizabeth was a mother, but she was also an industry. She was a wife, but she was also a face millions believed they knew. By 1957, the marriage to Wilding had ended. That same year, she married Mike Todd, a producer with force, money, humor, and extravagance. He was not quiet. He was not cautious. He filled rooms. He gave her gifts, attention, and the sensation of being adored not delicately, but enormously. Their daughter Liza was born in 1957. Elizabeth received an Academy Award nomination for Raintree County. Her life seemed to widen all at once. Children, fame, marriage, money, admiration. Todd made her feel chosen. For a moment, it looked like the great promise had arrived, and yet the first fracture had already opened beneath the shine. It is tempting, when looking back at Elizabeth Taylor, to imagine that the trouble began with scandal. That is how the public prefers its stories: a dramatic photograph, a lover, a headline, a punishment. But the truth had begun earlier, in quieter rooms, in the long education of being watched. Her first marriage had taught her that public celebration could conceal private fear. She had stood as a young bride before the world, then found herself inside a life where her distress was less important than the image around it. There had also been the pain of a lost pregnancy during that marriage, another private wound folded away while the world kept admiring her. We have all known someone like this. The kind who can make a room believe she is well because she has spent her life being rewarded for the performance of radiance. After Hilton, Wilding had seemed like kindness. He gave her sons, steadiness, and a gentler pace. But even there, the imbalance remained. He was much older, and his calm could not quiet the speed of her public life. Elizabeth's career did not fit neatly around motherhood. It pressed into everything. The children had comfort, but comfort is not the same as presence. Staff could prepare meals, supervise lessons, arrange travel. Staff could not become the mother herself. The studio years had trained Elizabeth to respond to demand. A film needed her, a photographer needed her, a husband needed her. The public needed her to be beautiful, dramatic, available, wounded, forgiven, condemned, then beautiful again. Somewhere in that endless exchange, ordinary family rhythms became fragile. Then came Mike Todd, and with him a different sort of intensity. Todd did not offer quiet. He offered abundance. He was loud, rich, certain, expansive. He seemed to know how to adore a star without making her smaller. He surrounded her with luxury and attention. He called forth the grandest version of her. If Wilding had been a room with curtains drawn, Todd was a chandelier blazing at midnight. Elizabeth responded to him with deep attachment. After the discipline of MGM, after the fear of Hilton, after the polite stability of Wilding, Todd's devotion must have felt like rescue. He made life theatrical, but in a way that seemed to belong to her rather than to the studio. And yet, even that happiness had its omissions. Her older sons were still very young. The household revolved around Elizabeth and Todd, their romance, their movement, their glamour. The children remained in the care of others more often than any child would have chosen. In 1957, with Liza newly born and Elizabeth's career still ascending, the shape of her life seemed impossible to sustain and impossible to refuse. She had love, she had children, she had work, she had beauty, she had the beginnings of great wealth and the attention of an entire nation. The fall did not announce itself. It never does. It entered as a telephone call, a delay, a piece of news carried from one adult to another. For one brief season, she believed she had found safety. Then the sky opened. March 1958. The American night stretched wide and empty over New Mexico with its hard mountains and dark distances. A private plane crossed that darkness carrying Mike Todd, the man who had made Elizabeth Taylor feel, for a little while, magnificently held. Elizabeth had been too ill to travel with him. That small fact would remain, as such facts do, cruelly simple. She was not on the plane. He was. The aircraft crashed in the mountains, and there were no survivors. She was 26, she was a widow, she had 3 children, one of them still an infant. There are losses that enter a life like weather, soaking everything slowly, and there are losses that arrive like a blade. Mike Todd's death was the second kind. The marriage had lasted little more than a year, but it had carried for Elizabeth the force of an answer. He had been flamboyant, demanding, protective, excessive. He had made the world seem large enough to hold her appetites and her wounds. Now he was gone. And that was the moment the scepter slipped. Not before the photographers, not before the gossip columns, not even before the public condemnation that would soon follow. It slipped in the private knowledge that the man who had adored her most extravagantly had vanished in a single night. Grief did not leave her alone. Fame would not permit it. The world watched the widow. It watched her face, her clothing, her body, her movements, her next choice. She had already lived too much in public, but now sorrow itself became a public exhibit. She was expected to mourn beautifully, to recover acceptably, to behave in a way that satisfied strangers. Instead, she moved toward Eddie Fisher, Mike Todd's close friend. Fisher was married to Debbie Reynolds, who had also been close to Elizabeth. What might have been understood in private as grief, need, confusion, or loneliness became, in public, a scandal. The country that had admired her turned hard. She was condemned, named, judged, and reduced to the role of the other woman. Elizabeth married Fisher in 1959. That same year, she converted to Judaism and took the Hebrew name Elisheba Rachel. The conversion belonged to her inner life, but the marriage belonged to the newspapers. Fisher had once been a beloved singer, Reynolds a cherished public figure. Elizabeth became the figure onto whom anger could be poured. She had lost Todd. Then she lost innocence in the court of public opinion. Yet work continued. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof came in the year of Todd's death, and another Oscar nomination followed. Suddenly, last summer brought still more acclaim. Butterfield 8 would bring her first Academy Award, though her body nearly failed her around that period, when pneumonia became so serious that doctors had to cut into her throat so she could breathe. She survived that too. But after Todd, survival was never the same as restoration. Every love after him had to compete with a ghost. By the early 1960s, Elizabeth Taylor had become one of the most famous women alive. She was also one of the most expensive. When 20th Century Fox pursued her for Cleopatra, she asked for a sum so large it might have ended the conversation. Instead, the studio agreed. Her fee crossed the $1 million threshold for a single film, and with it, she became a landmark in Hollywood power. It should have been triumph. It became spectacle. The production of Cleopatra was troubled almost from the beginning. Weather, delays, illness, changes of director, staggering costs. The picture seemed to swell beyond human management. Elizabeth became dangerously ill with pneumonia, and filming stopped. Rumors of death circled before she returned. The film moved to Rome, to Cinecittà, where the ancient world was rebuilt under modern lights. Then Richard Burton arrived as Mark Antony. He was Welsh, brilliant, theatrical, roughened by drink, and gifted with a voice that seemed made for kings and ruin. Elizabeth was still married to Eddie Fisher. Burton was still married to Sybil Williams. None of that stopped what happened between them. Their affair became international news. Photographers hunted them through Rome. restaurants, hotels, yachts, streets. Nothing stayed private. Religious authorities condemned them. Public figures scolded them. The scandal might once have ended a career. Instead, it seemed to feed the strange new age of celebrity. The more they were condemned, the more the world looked. Elizabeth and Burton married in 1964 after both divorces were complete. They became a double star, a traveling empire of talent, appetite, alcohol, jewels, quarrels, reconciliations, and astonishing expenditure. They made films together. They fought together. They dazzled together. Burton gave her jewels that became almost characters in the story. The Krupp diamond, La Peregrina pearl, the Taylor Burton diamond. Stones passed between them as apology, possession, proof, and theatre. The world watched the diamonds, while the children watched from farther away. Michael Jr., Christopher, Liza, and Maria lived amid money, travel, hotels, schools, staff, yachts, and instability. Elizabeth loved them, but love did not always become daily presence. Her life was larger than the room, and children can be lonely, even in houses full of servants. It is the part of these stories we want least to hear, fellow travellers. The part that says even the brightest rooms can leave someone unseen. Elizabeth's finest acting did not vanish inside the scandal. In Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, opposite Burton, she gave one of the great performances of her career and won her second Academy Award. Yet the work drew from dangerous emotional ground. The film's bitterness, cruelty, need, and exhaustion seemed to echo too closely the atmosphere of the marriage itself. Behind the public glamour, Elizabeth and Burton drank heavily. Their fights became notorious. Their love had heat, intelligence, and theatrical grandeur, but it also had damage. By 1974, after 10 years of marriage, they divorced. In 1975, they remarried in Botswana. 10 months later, they divorced again. The pattern had become plain. They could not live together peacefully, and separation did not set them free. In 1976, Elizabeth married John Warner, a Virginia politician who later became a United States Senator. She tried to enter a different life: farms, campaigns, Washington rooms, political duties, public smiles of another sort. It did not fit. She became unhappy, gained weight, and the press, which had once worshipped her beauty, mocked her body with special cruelty. The marriage ended in 1982. Pain now pressed harder. The old back injury, the years of surgeries, the strain of film work, and the use of medication deepened into dependency. Alcohol and prescription drugs became part of the daily battle. In 1983, while appearing in Private Lives with Burton, she entered the Betty Ford Center. It was a stark admission from a woman whose image had once seemed armored in diamonds. Then Burton died in 1984. Even after the divorces, he remained central to the story of her life. His death did not arrive as a simple ending. It reopened everything. And yet, in the midst of all this, Elizabeth found a purpose that did not depend on beauty, husbands, or box office. When Rock Hudson became ill during the AIDS crisis and died in 1985, she responded not with distance, but with action. She helped create AmFAR and became one of the first major celebrities to speak publicly and forcefully for people many others avoided. She raised money, challenged fear, lobbied, and used her fame as a weapon against indifference. In 1987, she launched Passion. In 1991, White Diamonds followed and became a phenomenon. The perfume business made her not merely a star, but a formidable businesswoman. That same year, she founded the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation and married Larry Fortensky at Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch. The helicopters above the ceremony proved that even late romance could not escape spectacle. That marriage ended in 1996. By then, she had married 8 times to 7 men. The searching had not stopped. It had only grown quieter. The hollow crown still glittered, but it had grown cold against the skin. The closing years of Elizabeth Taylor's life did not have the velocity of the old scandals. They moved instead through hospital rooms, operations, recoveries, charitable work, and the long narrowing that illness brings. Her body had rebelled for decades. The injury from National Velvet had never truly left her. There had been back operations, severe pain, pneumonia, hip replacements, skin cancer, a benign brain tumor, heart trouble, and periods of deep frailty. By the late 1990s, the face that had once filled cinema screens was often seen through the language of survival: bandages, wheelchairs, doctors, recoveries. In 1997, after a seizure and stroke, doctors found a benign brain tumor. Surgery followed. Elizabeth did not vanish from view in shame. She had never been good at disappearing. Even suffering, she faced the camera with a kind of battered defiance, as though age and pain were merely new costumes in a drama she had not chosen but would still perform. The awards came too in those later years. In 1993, she received the Academy's Jean Hirschholt Humanitarian Award and the AFI Life Achievement Award. In 2000, she was made Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. In 2001, she received the Kennedy Center Honors. The world, having devoured her, now honored her. And yet honors do not ease a spine. They do not quiet a heart. In 2004, Elizabeth was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. In 2009, she underwent heart surgery to repair a valve problem. She was 77 then, with a medical history that would have exhausted many people long before. Still, she continued, the foundation remained, the fragrances remained, the name remained. Her Bel Air home became the center of her later life, secluded and familiar. Visitors found not the young Cleopatra, not the bride of Burton, not the girl of National Velvet, but an older woman surrounded by memory, jewels, photographs, animals, friends, family, the evidence of a life that had never been small. By February 2011, she was hospitalized at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles for congestive heart failure. The stay lengthened. Her children came to her side. The great public woman, who had spent so much of her life surrounded by noise, cameras, applause, quarrels, and judgment, approached the end in the ordinary human way. In a medical room, with breath measured and the body finally asking for rest. March 23, 2011. Elizabeth Taylor died in Los Angeles. She was 79 years old. Her funeral was private, held at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Even then, a trace of humor remained. The service began late by her own instruction, a final small theatrical gesture from a woman who had never entirely surrendered timing. Afterward, the jewels were catalogued, the collections were sold, the foundation continued its work. The films were watched again. The scepter had not shattered loudly. It had simply been lowered, at last, from a tired hand. What remained of Elizabeth Taylor was not one thing. It never is, with lives like hers. There were the films, The Child on the Horse, The Young Woman in a Place in the Sun, the grand spectacle of Cleopatra, the raw and bruising force of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. There were the photographs, the diamonds, the perfume bottles, the auction catalogues, the headlines, the 8 marriages reduced to a number too easily repeated. There were also the children who had lived near the center of the storm without always being held by it. There were the staff-filled houses, the boarding schools, the stepfathers, the careful public statements after death. There was love, certainly. But love, in some families, arrives wrapped in absence. We watch these lives, and something stirs in us. Not judgment, not quite pity. Perhaps recognition, the knowledge that a person can be adored by millions and still be unreachable at the breakfast table. Elizabeth Taylor had been made into beauty before she had been allowed to understand herself. She had been sold as innocence, condemned as desire, celebrated as resilience, and finally honored as a humanitarian. She survived scandals that might have destroyed others. She survived illnesses that should have slowed her much sooner. She survived grief, addiction, mockery, and the strange cruelty of being visible for too long. Her late work for people with AIDS did not erase the wreckage. It stood beside it. That is often how redemption appears in real life, not as a clean washing away, but as a candle placed in a damaged room. The world wanted to remember her as violet eyes and diamonds. The quieter truth was heavier. She had carried pain under velvet, loneliness under applause, and a hunger for love that no jewel could finally answer. In the silent palace of her memory, the photographs still gleam, and somewhere beyond them, the fallen scepter lies where all bright things come to rest. If you found yourself in this story, even for a moment, you may find yourself in the next one too. Subscribe to The Fallen Scepter and stay with us. There are many more lives to remember.